Hello, my friend and fellow lightworker on the path. Welcome back to this channel. I am Josephine Hartman, certified intuitive healer and Akashic Records practitioner and master teacher. And as always, my aim is to bring you a grounded, no fluff, no nonsense, ethical approach to spirituality and specifically to the Akashic Records. So if you are listening to this as an audio podcast on a podcast platform, please make sure to subscribe, leave a rating or review if this content has been serving you. If you're watching this on YouTube, as I am now growing my YouTube channel, it really supports the growth of that channel and of this content if you can hit that subscribe button, or leave a comment, leave a question in the comments below so we can engage as a community. And thank you so much for being here and for your support. I am forever grateful. So, in this episode and in this video today, I want to talk to you about the ego and primarily talk to you about doubt as a form of ego protection. So, doubt as an egoic coping mechanism or survival mechanism, we could say. Now, in my work, both on my podcast, Inner Work, which I've had for a very long time, I've been hosting that for about 7 years now, um, on the podcast, on my blog, of course, in my teaching. So, in all of my programs and courses, I talk about the ego so much, and we focus on the ego because ego tends to be one of the biggest obstacles, and I'm going to say maybe the biggest number one obstacle that gets in the way of your healing, your expansion, your spiritual growth, and you're really being able to live and express your full potential and your highest level purpose in this lifetime. Ego really is the number one obstacle. That's why I talk about it so much. Um, so, ego, if we want to define it a little bit, ego is the mask that we wear when we are out in the world to look a certain way, to fit in, to be accepted. So, ego is this mask, it's this outward facing identity that we have all developed to be liked, to be loved, and to avoid rejection to some degree. And that's just a natural part, an inescapable part of being human. We're all going to develop these egos, and there can be some benefits to that. So we don't want to just demonize the ego in any way because there are some positive developmental aspects to the ego. But here we're really talking about the ego self, the part of us that gets in the way of our spiritual development, growth, and healing. So that part of us that is always working overtime to make sure that we are safe, and I put air quotes around that, because, of course, the ego's idea of being safe generally means don't take any risks, don't put yourself out there in any way, don't live up to your full potential because what if you fail and you look like an idiot, right? So the ego's idea of safety is very narrow, very confined, very constricting. So the ego wants to make sure that nothing is going to change and that the status quo is just going to stay the same, right? Even if that status quo has been draining you, if it has been draining the life out of you, the joy out of you, the energy out of you. So the ego would prefer that we stay inside of our familiar prison of the past, living out the same old patterns, the same old stories, not moving forward, not changing, because change to the ego, and really even just the thought of change to the ego, is very, very threatening. So ego is the part of us that seeks to protect us. And again, I'm putting air quotes around protect us because it's not a genuine sense or form of protection. It's just more this constricting, stay in your comfort zone kind of thing. So ego is the part of us that wants to protect us like an overbearing parent. So think about that overbearing, anxious, helicopter parent, micromanaging, just constantly hovering over you, making sure you're safe, making sure you're not going to get hurt in any way. Um, because ego, like that parent, wants to protect you from rejection. It wants to protect you from criticism. It wants to protect you from failure, from embarrassment, from whatever else your ego may be fearing, right? And so ultimately, it's really that your ego doesn't want to experience failure or criticism or embarrassment itself, right? That's the part of you that feels if I am rejected, if I am criticized, if I fail, if I put myself out there and I fail in some way, that's going to destroy me, right? So that's the ego. That's the part of you that fears these things so deeply because it feels, well, if I'm criticized, that's like death. That's like a fatal attack. I'm never going to be able to cope with the uncomfortable emotions of being criticized. And I'm just never going to recover from that, which is not true, right? The ego over exaggerates in that way. So, to protect you from all of these things that the ego fears might hurt you, the ego might chime in with a voice, a little bit of a nagging or questioning voice that might say to you, are you sure that's a good decision that you're making? So, second guessing, right? The ego might make you second guess yourself or overthink the decisions that you're making. Ego might speak to you and say, what if you can't handle that? What if things go wrong? What if you put yourself out there and then you discover you really aren't good enough or you really aren't worthy enough? What if you discover that your ideas are terrible and you're just completely embarrassed and humiliated? Don't do that. Stay in your comfort zone, stay in your little bubble, and you'll be okay, right? So this is all the voice of ego, what ego might tell us to try to protect us. So in all of these examples, first of all, you can see these are all like catastrophizing, right? And the voice of ego tends to have these cognitive distortions running in that voice. So things like catastrophizing, black or white thinking, all or nothing thinking, perfectionism, all of these distortions in how we might think about ourselves or think about the world or think about the actions and the choices that we are making in the world. So there's a lot of catastrophizing, a lot of negative what ifs, right? What if you fall flat on your face? What if people reject you? What if you are a failure? Don't put yourself out there. So you can see how ego uses doubt, because all of those what ifs really are different forms, different variations of doubt. And ego uses this as one of its primary tactics to hold you back, to keep you from expanding, to keep you inside of your comfort zone, inside of that safe box or prison. So ego is very skilled at introducing doubt in these ways into our thoughts, into our decision-making process, really making us waver, making us feel unsure, second guessing, as we said, really second guessing our intuitive awarenesses. So ego might make you second guess or question your intuition, and your intuitive hits, it might make you question your inner knowing and your inner truth, right? So what you know is true for you at a gut level, at a heart level. Ego has a way of coming in and making you question that and making you feel unsure of yourself. So this can have a paralyzing effect, as you may have experienced sometimes, which is exactly what the ego intends. Because if you are paralyzed, then you're not going to change. Nothing is going to change. If you're paralyzed, the status quo is going to stay the same, which is ultimately the ego's goal, right? It's just to keep things the same way they've always been. So, ego believes that it's protecting you by introducing doubt in all of these ways and by making you question yourself, making you question your talent, your abilities, your skills, your worthiness. Ego, that can be a real sneaky tactic and strategy that the ego might use, is to make you question your very worthiness as a human. Ego might make you question your capacity to heal, your capacity to grow and change, and to overcome obstacles or challenges that may come up as you are living your highest purpose more and more every day. Ego might also make you overthink and overanalyze everything. And I can speak from personal experience there, firsthand experience, as a recovering overanalyzer, just how paralyzing that can be. Now, the good news, for some good news, once you recognize this kind of doubt when it comes up, once you recognize this kind of doubt as a form of ego protection, so ego misguidedly trying to protect you, you can recognize that, you can see it for what it really is. You can name it, right? You can start to see through it. You can start to see and recognize all of the ego's strategies that it has been using, that it might try to use. So you might also recognize, okay, I have experienced this kind of doubt before. And whenever I hear these questioning voices coming from my ego, when I hear the what ifs, that's really what has paralyzed me in the past. Or that's what has made me question my intuition or my creativity or my desire to expand. So now you're onto it, right? When you start recognizing these things and seeing them for what they really are, now you're onto it. Now you can start challenging this form of ego doubt every single time that you become aware of it. So let's say ego pops in and says to you in a snarky tone, as it might do sometimes, ego might say to you, "Are you sure that's a good decision you're making? Are you sure that this is going to work out for you if you make this particular decision?" So ego is introducing that little bit of doubt, that little bit of hesitation, or maybe a lot of doubt. Now you can recognize that and say to yourself, okay, that question is not really that helpful when it's coming from a place of ego, when it's coming from my ego just trying to protect me from whatever. So you can respond to the ego in that moment. You can come back with something like, you know, ego, I'm still in the process of making this decision. So, whatever the decision is in that moment of your life, I'm still in the process of making this decision. I can't know for sure 100% in advance that it's the best decision I'm ever going to make. Nobody can really know that in advance because we're just human, right? So we have to trust. There's a certain level of trust. So you can say to your ego, I don't know 100%, but this decision is feeling aligned right now. So I'm going to follow my inner guidance on that. I'm going to trust that I'm capable of making really good decisions for myself. I'm going to trust that no matter the outcome, I can flow with life. I can use whatever happens. So, whatever the outcome is, I can use that as an opportunity to grow, to learn more about myself, to overcome a challenge. And I'm willing to do that, right? I'm choosing and I'm willing to do that. But thanks for your input, ego. And that can really, really help to turn down the volume, turn down the intensity on that nagging, questioning voice of the ego. So let me give you another example. So if ego pops in and says, what if things go wrong? So it just gives you one of these negative what ifs. What if things go wrong? Then you can recognize that, okay, that's actually the voice of my ego catastrophizing as it tends to do. So I'm going to counteract with a statement like, what if things go exactly as they're meant to go? What if things go exactly as they're meant to go for the highest good of myself and anyone else involved in this decision or this situation? Or you could turn that around in another way and say to the ego, what if things turn out more beautiful, more aligned, more easeful, more abundant than ever before? And that, as you can hear those words, right, as we're putting these out into the universe, that can really stop the ego in its tracks, right? Ego tends to not really know how to respond when we turn the what ifs around in this way. And I call these positive what if questions, by the way. And they're powerful for standing up against doubt, standing up against catastrophizing, and catching those negative what ifs and then turning them around. So counteracting them with these positive what if questions. So, what if things turn out beautifully? What if this is a great opportunity for me to just go with the flow and trust myself and trust the universe? Again, that can really turn down the dial and the volume on the voice of ego. And the more you practice this, because it is a practice, right? And ego is still gonna pop in. Ego is still going to throw these questions at us and try to protect us because we're human. We're never going to get rid of the ego fully. We don't even want to do that. It's not necessary to get rid of ego. It's just about shifting our relationship to our ego selves so that ego is not running the show. So, as you practice this day in and day out, and you refine your ability to challenge the ego or to call ego out, to see it for what it is, then doubt, as this form of ego protection, it starts to lose its power over you and it starts to dissolve. It loses its grip on you. It's not going to hold you hostage anymore. It's not going to paralyze you anymore. So again, ego may still be there, may still pop in from time to time, but it doesn't get to control you anymore. And that's a huge transformation. That's a huge shift. Once you can see ego for what it is, once you can recognize it, once you're not allowing it to control what you think, what you say, what you do, what you're choosing in your life, it doesn't get to run the show anymore. So you can be so much more conscious about every choice you're making and how you are creating your life from day to day. So the more we practice this, the more ego steps into the background. And again, ego may still be in the same room with you, right? But it's not the biggest part of that room. It's not the biggest player in that room. Ego might just be, a tiny little thing kind of in the corner. And it's much easier to see it for what it is, to not get sidetracked, not get distracted by that voice of the ego, or to feel like ego has so much power over you. So its voice gets much smaller, much quieter. And that means you can actually hear the voice of your higher self so much more loudly, so much more clearly. You can hear the voice of your inner knowing. You can hear the voice of your intuition and follow that and not be held back by this egoic distraction and noise. So, when the voice of ego returns, if it does, just know the more you practice this, it's gonna get smaller, it's gonna get quieter, and there's gonna be longer stretches of time where you're not even gonna hear the voice of ego, and ego's just not gonna be getting in your way anymore as much. But if the voice of ego returns for whatever reason, and it tries to introduce doubt, it tries to confuse you, it tries to question yourself or distract you from your path, you can start to kind of chuckle at it a little bit when it tries to come back and take over you and hijack you. You can chuckle at it a little bit, and you can look ego straight in the face and say to that ego, hey, old buddy, old friend. And we're being a little bit facetious there, right? Because ego is not really our friend in that sense, but there is value to befriending the ego a little bit, so we can not be totally controlled by it. So you can say, ego, old buddy, haven't heard from you in a while. Not sure where you went. It's good to know you're still there, right? Again, being a little bit facetious. Good to know you're still there. And I'm not taking the bait this time. So sometimes it's really helpful to stand up to the ego in that way and just say to it, not going to listen, not going to entertain what you're saying, not even going to dignify that with a response, right? So let's say if ego is telling you you're not worthy or you're not good enough or you have to be perfect in order to be loved. Any of that stuff, old stories, old illusions, it's not true. That is not reflecting the truth of who and what you really are. So we're not going to dignify that with a response. We're not going to entertain any of those thoughts. And you can just say, ego, old buddy, there you are, playing the same old record again, right? Playing the same old story again. I know that's not true, and I'm not going to take the bait this time. But thanks. Thanks for trying to help. And you'll see the more and more you do that, ego just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And the beautiful thing and the powerful thing about that is that you are creating more and more space in yourself, in your life, in your mind, to connect with your higher self, to connect to your intuition, and to make the voice of your intuition louder and louder and stronger and stronger. So I hope this episode has been helpful. And also, I would love to hear from you. What have been some of your challenges in interacting with your own ego? So, do you notice any ego patterns in yourself that come up from time to time? What does your ego say to you that may trigger or paralyze you? Let's work through some of that together. So you can leave a comment about that below this video, or as always, you can send a note to me at josephinehartman.com, and let's continue the conversation there. So if you haven't yet joined my free email community, which gives you access to my 8-day Akashic Records mini course and weekly newsletter, I would love to invite you to do that if you feel called. So you can do that through the link in the show notes or video description below. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please let me know how this lands, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. Take really great care of yourself.